But no, when it comes to lawyers learning from engineers, I think a big lesson is law should be treated as a team sport.
Welcome to the Law and Beyond show, where we talk about everything that is the legal universe, that is law, technology, education and compliance, and academia. I'm joined today by special guest Ash Kelso, who is a mechatronics engineer turned lawyer turned LegalTech startup and co-founder of Hivelight. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thanks for having me, Chantal.
And look, I did it. I called you Ash and then Ashley. So clearly my subconscious is saying, let's go with that conversation we were just having, which is about, name preferences and what it's like when people make assumptions from your name.
The whole unisex name. Yeah, my mother chose the name of Ashley, and then shortly thereafter it became a very popular girl's name. And so of course you go to school, all the guys saying, "Isn't Ashley a girl's name?" You're like, "Yeah, shut up." And then, but then it's funny because then you get into your professional life, and there's been occasions where in correspondence, people have mistaken my gender for whatever reason. And it's interesting because sometimes you get a window into how women can occasionally be treated by some of the sort of corporate boneheads of the previous era, or ones who have learned from them as well. And it's funny, I was doing a dispute once for a client. It was with an ISP, internet service provider, and they thought I was a woman communicating with them, and you got very much this attitude of, "Madam, you're making a fuss" sort of approach. It was very condescending until all of a sudden one of them realized I was a guy, and then apparently I was talking reason, and we
Wow, imagine that
there. But it was just like, I'm going to keep this going because this is interesting to see how you get a window into it. So it's a bit archaic the way some people will behave, even professionally.
And I think it really opens a window into your soul, so to speak, because you have had so far such a interesting, wonderful experience. You shared with me your bio, which we've included in the show notes there, and your career path is quite unique because particularly there aren't that many engineers in law, and most lawyers I've come across are so adverse to numbers, you could almost call them enumerate, and I'm sure many would agree here. It's just, maths, that's not me, that's why I did law. But what prompted the career change, and how did your engineering mindset influence your approach to legal practice?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it was a few fairly practical things. So for one, when I came into engineering, I joined the Department of Defense and in a project management capacity, because as a mechatronics engineer, you're used to crisscrossing all the different disciplines, and so you become this translator and synthesizer of all the different disciplines. So, but then, of course, 2008, what happened around then? The GFC hit, like a meteor into the earth, and led to pretty much the extinction of all job opportunities in public and private sector and engineering. So we were just at the mining boom was happening, and all the capital dried up. So I couldn't go anywhere in private sector, and in the public sector, all the guys above me who were going to retire, so I could have got some promotions, sat there because their super got killed overnight. So they just wanted to sort of wait it out and weather the storm. And so I thought, well, I can either have my career in a holding pattern and hope this blows over, which I don't think it ever really did in this country, or I can pivot and keep learning. And I thought, well, my experience had been that I was a much better communicator and fixer and mediator in a way than most of the engineers I dealt with. In fact, most projects ran aground because of poor communication. But I was never going to be paid properly for those skills in an engineering capacity. You saw the jobs and what people get paid for that, and it wasn't going to work that way. And I realized too that it was often the frustration of engineers that we end up having to sort of find a way to make the decision work that was made by someone who didn't really understand how things function. And so you're trying to find a way to make what was not an optimal decision, to say, diplomatically, work. Whereas it was the business law and finance grads who ended up in those roles got to make that decision. So I just thought, well, you can't beat them, join them, And
I think that's a fantastic decision, speaking, I guess, on behalf of the legal profession here, I think it's much more valuable having more engineering minds in there, and that is wonderful. And do you think that engineering had shifted your mindset a little bit? Because I know that at your father's firm, you applied skills that created better systems to help particularly abuse claim clients get better outcomes. And could you maybe walk us through how that engineering perspective helped you think about the problem and come up with those solutions?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, one of the things that also motivated me, aside from, career stagnation, to make the switch was in engineering, you sort of feel a bit disconnected from actually helping everyday people. Whereas when you jump into an area like personal injury law, you're right on the coalface of helping everyday people. And so it's sort of like an honor to be able to stand in their shoes and help them do things which they wouldn't be able to do for themselves. And so this was the chance to do that. And I'd say that engineering, it sort of makes you take a much more holistic approach. I find that lawyers tend to think in terms of just leveraging their own time and maybe a few other people around them, but just the people side of things, when really you need to be thinking in terms of there's people, processes and technology to get the job done. And you're used to thinking in terms of stakeholders and that sort of thing, and what you can do to get the job done. So I tend to take an approach when it comes to running things more efficiently that works quite well, I think, which is, as an engineer, you think methodically, you think you're going to plan out what you're going to do, right? You're going to go map this thing out, start to finish, who does what, how does it happen, start to finish on a matter, and then you start to see the friction points, where things are going to slow down, where it's going to be more difficult, and then you apply, improvements to the people, processes or technology at each of those stages so that you can remove the friction. Then, something that I found, I sort of picked up actually part of my legal studies because I did the JD at UNE, and so part of that I combined some research into behavioural economics, and I applied that sort of two-system model of decision making, thinking fast and slow. And
excellent book by Daniel Kahneman.
That's right. You think of a firm like a decision making machine, right? The more efficiently you can make and execute the right decisions, the faster you can turn the matters over, better for cash flow, better for everyone, fewer errors. So the more you can sort of template out the decisions that need to be made at each part along the way, that helps a lot, kind of like organizational heuristics. And then from there, the other part I find is very much an engineering approach, which is the more you can think about what tasks can be run in parallel. So you start with the end. What are the outcomes I need to deliver on? What are the deliverables? Things I actually need to create, like submissions, expert reports, closing arguments, pleadings, things like that. What are the things I'm going to need to feed into those and then deliver those along the way? Break that apart, delegate out to different people, and what things can be run in parallel rather than in sequence. Because the more you can run in parallel, like you get used to this in engineering from things like Microsoft Planner and that sort of thing, the power of when you can run tasks in parallel is it gets done start to finish much faster, which in law means better cash flow, right? Certainly in areas like personal injury where, every week costs, the faster you can get from A to B, the better. And also de-risks things, right? The longer the case runs on, the more you become concerned about actually getting paid.
Yeah, because you get paid at the end. And that in turn is going to be of great assistance for, litigation funders, and then in turn also that accessibility issue as well. So it's almost like a trifecta of a win-win. I find it really interesting how you mentioned about that the process of mapping out where the decisions are so you can shorten the time between the decisions. That a big part of my research at the moment involves a lot of ethics, and something that I learnt through this process that was a little bit of a shock to me. So I'm giving everybody the permission, maybe I was the only one and I was just a little bit oblivious and ignorant, but that ethics is the philosophy of decision making. And so now that's kind of shifted my point of view of every time decision making gets brought up, I immediately turn to, well, what's the ethical framework to make the decision? And what I found so insightful from what you just said as well, is connecting that to the organizational culture, because that's the environment in which those decisions are made, and that in effect is the ethical framework that whether that's consciously done or not, that is what's being done in those decisions.
Yeah, that was something that actually influenced me when it came to my LegalTech journey as well. Was as a lawyer, I just couldn't bear the thought of doing a job for a client that was less than what I really wanted it to be, less than the best that it could be. The problem is that often there are certain things you need to do in law to prepare a case which are almost what you call computationally prohibitive. Like there's too much data for a human being to get through, or for the budget that you've got. You don't have a floor of actuaries perhaps as well to do all the calculations, or you've only got lawyers to do the calculations. And so that was another reason for me to turn to the technology, which is to produce the best outcome for the client, because they're trusting me. I just couldn't bear the thought of not doing the best job possible simply because it would just take too much time and resources. So that then came over to coding up solutions where you could do a month worth of calculations in 10 minutes and get the best outcome to support what you needed for the client. So yeah, ethics certainly plays a role, I think.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think that there's so much that can be learnt from that process. And do you think what would you think would be the number one thing lawyers could learn from engineers, and vice versa?
And there are things that the engineers need to learn from lawyers. I tell you, when it comes to me. Ethics, yeah, that was a funny one. Everyone pretty much slept through the ethics class in engineering school.
Yeah. It's almost like an afterthought
building
sometimes.
Something. So it's just sort of some wishy-washy thing. But no, when it comes to lawyers learning from engineers, I think a big lesson is law should be treated as a team sport. You will be so much more effective as an individual and as a firm and as well a team if you can treat it like that. Don't just think about leveraging your own time. Think about making the people around you shine as well, because then each of you is doing your part. This came back to another sort of, I guess, potentially ethics point that you might have raised before, which also lends on that sort of Jim Collins good to great, which is getting the right people in the right seats. Something which often happens at firms is you have admin staff trying to make decisions that really lawyers should be making, and then lawyers doing legwork that really admin staff should be making, and the whole thing stalls, and you end up paying too much for the work to get done, and it slows down too because people are unsure. So, yeah, as a team sport, I think, and think holistically, people, process, technology, right? It's not just people and throwing time at it and then throwing more and more bodies. As it comes to the engineers learning from lawyers, a big one, I think, is to learn to think more politically. You got to think about the self-interest of the people that you're trying to persuade. So often engineers end up pigeonholed and not really getting a seat at the table because they think, well, of course you'd adopt this solution for this problem. It's the best solution. Unfortunately, that solution doesn't serve the political priorities of the people who are going to make that decision at the time, or they can't see how it does, because you're talking about the technical superiority, where it's like, how does this get me more of the thing that I want? Yes. And unfortunately, that's just the human side of it that I think engineers often miss out on. That's
really great, because, and I was just thinking about the last couple of questions that we're talking about. It reminds me so much. There's this book called The Courage to be Disliked. Have you heard of it?
Yeah. It's translated from the Japanese, isn't it?
It's two Japanese authors, and where they it's absolutely mental to try and consume as an audiobook, because the narrator that they got doesn't change their voice, and the whole entire thing is written in terms of a dialectic. Yeah, between a philosopher and a youth. And so he doesn't change his voice. So it took me about 2 years to actually get through as an audiobook, which I probably should have just bought the physical book by that point. But what reminds me, because you mentioned the people, process and technology framework a couple of times, and about communication and how you identified that a lot of the issues stemmed from communication. I think a big takeaway from The Courage to be Disliked is that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. even system problems. So that, I think, is a really interesting way to look at a problem where it's going, well, is there an actual problem with the system, or is there just a communication issue because people don't know where accountability is meant to lie?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's something I experienced. I don't know if it's, through all organizations, but it is an unfortunate, sort of an Australian thing, which is like when a problem occurs in a business organization, the first reaction seems to be, okay, well, we'll solve the problem by lynching whoever happened to be on deck at the time that the problem occurred, as opposed to, I actually think, you know what, most likely there was a problem with the systems that were being used. There was something, if we can make a change and learn from what happened here, there was something we missed. But if we put this other check or balance in place, it's going to get seen next time, so it won't happen again. If it does keep happening, then maybe we look at the people involved who maybe didn't care enough to do their job properly. But, people are expensive and risky to hire, so let's try to make the most of them when we've got them. And,
I think a really great example of precisely that was the recent conflict of interest and information barrier issue that occurred with PricewaterhouseCoopers and the ATOs.
I believe there was something where I think they were giving advice on tax that was somehow compromised.
Yeah, so there was two different teams. Yeah, that's right. There was one team that was helping the ATO with a particular technology transformation that involved some change to legislation and how the ATO were to calculate things. But then they breached information barriers into the tax advisory area, where the tax advisory team were then advising clients on that prospective legislative change. And so there was a very obvious conflict of interest there, and exactly what you're saying, there was lynching. Yeah. Corporate lynching involved in that. And, every problem needs a scapegoat, because it's a very public thing that was quite embarrassing. But it was a really great lesson in that sense of what are the systems and processes in place, and that you could have the best system and process in the world, but if you don't have people that are adherents to the ethics involved in that decision process, then it all falls down. So it's a absolutely fundamental there that you were echoing. I'm wondering, has there been anything surprising or newly challenging for you about building technology, especially for lawyers, that you've discovered since your co-founding of Hivelight?
Yeah, the law definitely has some unique challenges. So, for one, I would say the low frequency of tech adoption. So firms will often go 5-10 years without making any meaningful change to their technology stack. So that creates a problem for businesses entering the space, depending on what sort of solution you bring in. But a lot of the time, it's difficult because you need to get your reps up. The more implementations you can do, the more feedback you can get in the shorter period of time, the faster you can refine the product and find product market fit. But if the sales cycle is long, there's fewer sales, fewer implementations in the same block of time. So it just pushes the whole thing out. And of course, time to result is everything. So that's one thing. And I think, as an aside, almost coming back to the lynching thing, it is unfortunately a risk in many firms to be the one who is driving a technology change, because you're making a change, right? So oftentimes it's people who are making the business decisions, are often not got that founder sort of energy to the thing. It's more about sort of, I think, a bit of protecting the position. So if you make a change and it goes badly, that's your ass. If you make a change and it goes well, other people are jealous, and that's your ass. So it's kind of like, it's
win.
better actually to just stand back
and not make a decision.
Unfortunately, if you don't make a change, the business stagnates, and then that's everyone's. So, and then you get overtaken. So there's got to be a bit more courage there, I think. Then it comes to, I found surprisingly, because it wasn't my experience coming out through the law, but I've seen it widespread, is a surprisingly soft management style. I haven't seen this in other industries, but for some reason, law firms and lawyers don't strongly mandate new changes in the operation of their business. Staff seem to be free to push back and say, I don't think I'm going to use that new system. I don't think I'm going to use that new process. I'm just going to do my own thing here in a silo. And that's actually allowed. Whereas, what I came up through, in my father's firm, which was, well, this is the way we're doing things. And if you don't follow that, then you can go do it at someone else's firm, not here. So you'd be looking for a job in about 2 weeks, was really the way it was. Like, you get on board or get out. But most firms are quite soft in that, and unfortunately it makes it difficult to get technology change across, because people need to see that this is the new normal, this is the way things are going, before they'll then commit to that. That's the hardest part. Training's not the hard part. People work it out within a few days once they see that this is the new way we're going to do it, and this is the way it is. And the other part I'd say is that technology is unfortunately viewed in many firms as a budget item and a cost to be controlled, rather than an investment on which you're going to get a return. And so it's thought, no, we only have this much money to spend on technology, as opposed to, if we spend this money on the tech, we're going to make X amount more money. It's kind of like, if I can put $10 into a bag and get 100 back, well, don't you just keep doing that? You don't set a budget for that kind of thing. But those are some of the challenges that you see.
Honestly, it's so validating to have this conversation, because that is a critical piece in why I am doing the research that I'm doing. And so I can confirm with you, it's absolutely reflected in the literature as well, that the simple truth is we don't train lawyers to manage people. We just don't. We train them to think like lawyers. We give them legal reasoning, and they finish law school, and then they learn through effectively a rote process in a firm. So it really depends on the firm, and a makeup like Australia, where the majority of firms are under 50 seats. That's the bulk of where the profession sits. In fact, a third of the profession are sole pracs, with 2 to 3 staff members working for them. So that is what constitutes the environment that now we're seeing emerging leaders of these firms, where they've been working as senior associates for a while, and then they do the practice management course or the stepping up course, or to allow them to qualify to practice on their own account. But even then, that training is not heavily leadership training. It's not about, managing expectations, communicating with teams, working out what appropriate measures are when it comes to the not just productivity, but what, how to motivate people to do things. So, oftentimes they do not have any frameworks to even know what to come back with when a staff member says, well, I'm not doing it that new way because I'm doing it this other way, and that's been fine. Like, what's the problem with me doing it the old way? I'm just going to keep doing that. So that, I think, is big fundamental, absolutely. And then the other side of things, where you're talking about the cost to be managed, instead of looking at it from a return on investment perspective, comes down to the business literacy. And we're exploring, well, what tools do lawyers need to have to navigate those conflicts between law as a profession and law as a business? So it's just really magic having this conversation. What I guess, like, really drilling down. I can see you processing, so I'm giving you but really drilling down, what key advice do you have for others who have identified a systemic problem and are considering a move into legal tech to solve it?
Sure, I can enlighten them from some of the hard lessons I've learned. First I would say that you need to focus on solving issues that lawyers are actively and consciously annoyed by in their everyday practice. And there needs to be a common language for describing what those problems are, right? It's not enough that it's simply, it is actually a problem, right? There is a glaring inefficiency that needs to be something which they find actively annoying in their everyday life, not something they've just sort of made peace with as part of the furniture, even though it might be costing them a ton of money. And then if there's no sort of agreed language because they've just got used to it, to not even talk about it, then that's a problem. So you need to think about things that people are actively annoyed by. This is why I think like products like, I think VXT ends up being a really exceptional example of this, because as a lawyer, it's a pain in the ass to have to do the phone consult and then write the file note out and then come back to it 3 times because you forgot to add something in, or your staff mishear messages that they take on the phone. Like I did once for a solicitor when I was just working as a secretary basically, and took a message from Sandra Bullock, not realizing that was not a client of the firm. I misheard it. And she's like, why have I got an actress calling me for legal advice? So things like point solutions that people actively find annoying and for which there's an agreed language on it. The other part I would say is it's good to go for sort of point solutions where it requires the least amount of behavior change from the least amount of people, because you go the other way, you end up in a real challenge, right? You end up in like practice management system territory where everyone has to change behavior quite a bit and it's a whole thing. Whereas I think that risk management is part of why we're ending up in this best of breed territory now, where it's like this orchestra of apps rather than like all-in-ones that are really available, especially in the mid-tier. It's got a challenge on that at the moment. And then the other part I think I wish that we'd done from the start is at Hivelight is go API first. So, I mean, and I think if it's a more point solution, the more you're able to sit your solution within their existing practice management system or within Outlook, the better, because again, that reduces behavior change and it puts the visual prompt in front of them because it's there already. Firms complain about switching apps, I think because in the past it has been, and this word hurts my soul whenever I hear it, clunky, because it's, but where it's just not smooth in a way. Which, by the way, if you want to make any tech, founder just cringe and squirm, just say the word clunky, because it's a way of saying I didn't make a proper attempt to learn how to use this thing. So there you go.
Yep. The non-specific evaluative
problems around what this amounts to. I'm not going to particularize it.
It's
just like,
often whenever I'd hear that, the first thing I would respond with is curiosity. It's like, okay, what aspect are you finding clunky?
And blank response.
And I found that answer was always so illustrative of the person. What they find the challenge in any product is really a window into their frame of thinking about the task that they're trying to achieve, and then that gives rise to a further and better conversation. So that's really helpful advice. One of the things that we do on this show is I've got these conversation cards, and I purposely don't share them prior because you can't prepare for them. They're great little.
Humanity or something, is it?
That would be
that
interesting.
Yeah,
we're in the general rating, so
okay.
We don't go too spicy, and whenever I'm talking about criminal law, I do have my content warning there. But no, these are just some general lovely conversation topics to even open into the world of Ash Kelso's mind, and I'm going to shuffle them poorly for everybody's bemusement and select one randomly here. What do you think is your most annoying quirk?
It's probably overthinking things too much. So it's like my sister would say, who's also a lawyer, she'd say, Ash, remember, you're not in the High Court. Keep it simple and don't invest so heavily into the thing. It's a tendency, I think it's an engineering tendency as well, that even Hivelight we think, let's discipline ourselves, guys. Let's not over-engineer this thing. Let's build just enough and then see what people say, and if they need more, then we'll do more, because if we over-engineer it, it might get too complicated for them to use the thing in the first place. So keep it simple, and get it out there and iterate. But probably a tendency to sort of think too much on the thing before getting it out there.
Oh, I love that. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having a chat. The time has just whizzed past, and I really appreciate the insights from your magnificent career so far, and look forward to chatting again sometime.
No, my pleasure. And I should say, I know that the topic of this was like every firm needs an engineer or something similar like that. That's kind of what we aim to do with Hivelight for people. Was we did the hard work of building an app that helps you adopt those principles, so you don't have to go and spend 150K on an engineer.